I had just finished locking the side gate when I heard the unmistakable sound of heels stomping on concrete like they were trying to break the earth in half. "Michael Johnson," came the shrill, furious voice of the HOA's queen witch herself, Harriet Anderson. I turned around slowly, already regretting every decision that led me to this moment. There she was, arms flared out like a traffic cop on a caffeine bender, her ever-present clipboard clutched in one hand and her phone in the other, ready to call whoever she thought would back up her tantrum. "Is that a shed?" she hissed like the sight of it physically pained her. "It is," I said, dusting my hands off. "Just finished installing it. You can't just throw up structures in your backyard like it's some kind of junkyard, Michael. This is a community." She snapped, stepping closer like she was about to tackle it. "It's pre-approved," I said calmly, walking over to the shed. "Same color as the house, meets the setback requirements, no taller than 10 feet. I followed every guideline in the HOA handbook." Harriet's eyes went wide like I'd just spoken ancient Greek. "That's impossible. I wrote the handbook." I pulled a folded, laminated sheet out of my back pocket and handed it to her like a cop showing a badge. "Page 22, Section C. I even submitted the form." "Got the stamped approval last month from your secretary, remember? That was when you were too busy trying to get Mr. Thompson fined because his grass was an inch too tall." She stared at the paper like it had slapped her. Her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. "I'll have to double-check this," she muttered, already backing away like the shed might bite her. "Feel free," I said. "I've got the email chain too, and security footage of the delivery and installation just in case." She spun around and stormed off like a wet cat, but I wasn't celebrating yet. I knew Harriet, and she didn't take public embarrassment well. She'd be back, and she'd come with backup. 3 days passed without a word. Not one knock, not one note on the door, not even the usual passive-aggressive newsletter slid under my mat. It was eerily quiet. For a woman who once filed a noise complaint over wind chimes, Harriet's silence was louder than any siren. Then, just before noon on Saturday, I saw 2 unfamiliar SUVs pulling into the cul-de-sac, tinted windows and all. They parked directly in front of my house, like they were staking out a cartel hideout. Out stepped 3 people in business attire, followed by a 4th man I recognized immediately. Colin Braithwaite, the HOA's legal liaison, which was a fancy way of saying guy who got his paralegal certificate online and never passed the bar. He adjusted his tie like he was about to walk into a courtroom and marched straight to my front door. I didn't wait for the bell. I opened the door and leaned on the frame. "Colin," I said, pretending to be surprised. "Didn't expect a visit from the HOA's finest." He cleared his throat. "Michael, we're here to discuss a violation of architectural uniformity." "The shed in your backyard was approved, filed, and compliant," I interrupted. "We've already been through this." One of the suited men stepped forward, tall, mid-40s with a clipboard and the kind of practiced frown that belonged on a tax auditor. "I'm Darren Fillmore," he said. "I've been contracted by the HOA as a private inspector. We're here to conduct a property audit under Article 11, subsection G." That was new. I'd read the handbook front to back and never saw that clause. "There's no Article 11, I said flatly. Colin shifted uncomfortably. "We recently adopted amendments during a closed board session." "Closed?" I asked. "You need a quorum of homeowners notified in advance for that. Was there a vote?" Colin hesitated. Harriet, who had been hiding behind the column of my neighbor's porch like a bad movie villain, finally stepped out, holding a stack of papers like they were sacred scripture. "The board has emergency amendment privileges under extraordinary circumstances," she announced. "Extraordinary circumstances," I repeated. "You mean my legally permitted shed?" "It's not about just your shed," she said, walking up the drive. "There's a pattern of disregard for community standards, and we will not allow the integrity of this neighborhood to erode." "So yes, we enacted Article 11. I crossed my arms. "Produce it." She handed over the documents. I scanned them, biting back a laugh. The amendment was clearly typed in a different font than the rest of the handbook, included no homeowner signatures, and had a creation date yesterday. "This is fraud," I said, holding it up. "You're forging amendments and trying to enforce them retroactively." It's not fraud if it protects the community, Harriet snapped. You're serious, I said, stepping back. You actually believe that? Darren stepped forward again. We're conducting the audit today either way. If you deny access, it will be noted as a refusal to comply and additional fines may be levied. I tilted my head. You step on my property without a court order and I'll call the sheriff, and I've got cameras. Every angle. You're being uncooperative, Colin said stiffly. No, I'm protecting my rights, I said. Now get off my property. They left, but not before Harriet made a big show of snapping photos of my lawn, mailbox, and even a perfectly legal bird feeder. I watched from the porch until they disappeared around the corner. Then I went inside and got to work. I pulled open the file cabinet in my office and retrieved the binder I'd started the month I moved in. It was labeled HOA Nonsense in thick red marker. Inside was every notice, email chain, approval form, and newsletter I'd ever received from them. I added the fraudulent Article 11 to the back, then sat down at my computer. First, I drafted a formal complaint to the County Housing Board, attaching copies of the forged amendment and referencing the HOA's own bylaws. Then, I contacted a retired judge I'd met at a veterans legal seminar, Judge Baines. He owed me a favor for helping his brother with a zoning dispute the year before. By Monday, I had a response. The county was opening an investigation into the HOA's conduct, and Judge Baines had agreed to draft a letter warning them of legal overreach and potential civil liability. I had it notarized and hand-delivered a copy to the HOA's Dropbox. 2 days later, Harriet called an emergency town hall meeting. The room at the community center was packed. Folding chairs filled every inch of the space, and still people stood along the walls. The usual suspects were there: Mr. Thompson, who'd lived here since the 80s, shaking his head in the corner, the Nguyen family, who always brought cookies but never got involved, and a whole lot of people I'd never seen show up to anything. Harriet stood at the podium, flanked by Colin and the board's treasurer, a woman who looked like she hadn't blinked since 1997. As many of you know, Harriet began, there has been a recent controversy regarding new architectural standards. I want to assure everyone that our actions were taken solely in the interest of preserving property values. What about forging amendments? A voice called out. It was Mr. Thompson. Harriet's jaw tightened. No amendments were forged, she said evenly. They were adopted under emergency provisions. You mean the provisions that don't exist, I said, stepping forward. Or the ones that require homeowner approval? I held up the letter from the county. This is a formal notice of investigation. You're being audited. And if you think this is just about a shed, you're wrong. It's about abuse of power, fraudulent documents, and illegal enforcement attempts. A murmur rippled through the room. Colin looked like he wanted to melt into the floor. Then I handed a second letter to the treasurer. This is from a retired judge who's agreed to consult pro bono on this matter. He believes your actions could constitute civil fraud and violation of homeowner rights under state law. Harriet opened her mouth, but no words came out. I move to suspend the board pending the investigation, I said loudly. I second, Mr. Thompson said, raising his hand. A half-dozen others echoed him. Hands went up all over the room. Harriet tried to gavel the meeting closed, but by then it was too late. The community had seen the truth. The vote wasn't official yet, but the pressure was building. And for the first time, the board realized they weren't untouchable. As the crowd dispersed, Harriet rushed up to me, face flushed. You think you've won, she hissed. You're making a scene over a shed. No, I said calmly. I'm making a stand against corruption, and this shed, it's just the beginning. She stormed off. Later that night, I installed 2 more cameras, just in case. The week after the town hall meeting, the neighborhood shifted. For the first time in years, people leaned on each other's fences and talked about more than lawn fertilizer. Cars slowed near my driveway just to give a thumbs up. Mrs. Langley from 2 doors down dropped off a peach cobbler in solidarity, and Mr. Nguyen waved me over one morning to help fix a loose shutter, his way of saying thanks, I guessed. There was a quiet current moving through the cul-de-sac, and everyone could feel it, but Harriet wasn't done. On Thursday at precisely 11:32 in the morning, A uniformed city inspector showed up at my front door. "Mr. Johnson," he asked, glancing at a clipboard. "That's me. I've got a work order here requesting an immediate inspection of all electrical and structural additions made to your property over the last 12 months, he said. "Name on the request is Harriet Anderson, says she's with the HOA. I stared at the paper. It had the city's letterhead, but the form was incomplete, no citation number, no accompanying complaint from a licensed contractor, and the section labeled reason for inspection just said shed suspected unsafe. "You're not supposed to be here," I said, tapping the form. "This was submitted fraudulently. The HOA doesn't have the authority to initiate city inspections without a verified incident or permit violation, and there's nothing on file against this property." He frowned, flipping through the pages. "I'll be honest, this doesn't look right," he admitted. "I'll have to report this back to my supervisor." "Please do," I said. "Also, I suggest you flag the sender. This isn't the first attempt at overreach." He nodded, made a quick note, and left without stepping past the threshold. That evening, I called a friend of mine who worked as a record supervisor at the planning and building department. After a few minutes on the phone, she confirmed what I suspected. The inspection request had been faxed from a private line, not the HOA's registered office. Worse, the form had been altered, sections crossed out and rewritten in pen. I hung up and started drafting a complaint to the city's fraud investigations unit. By Saturday, things got even uglier. A pair of uniformed officers arrived just after noon, responding to an anonymous tip about unlicensed construction and possible code violations. They were calm, polite, and clearly used to being dragged into nonsense. I invited them in, showed them the shed, handed over the original permit, and walked them through the entire paper trail from pre-approval to stamped approval to installation. One of them, Officer Rivas, shook his head. "Looks like someone's trying to use us as muscle," he said. "We'll file a report, but you're clear." Before they left, I pointed out the direction the anonymous tip likely came from, Harriet's house, where the curtains twitched as soon as they stepped off my porch. That night, I sent the footage of the officer's visit to my contact at the county's legal office. I also forwarded the forged inspection request and a new document I'd just received. A letter slipped under my door that morning, unsigned, claiming I was in violation of neighborhood morale standards and demanding that I dismantle the shed within 72 hours or face a community lawsuit. I scanned and saved it, then triple-checked the home security footage. Sure enough, at 3:12 a.m., someone in a hoodie walked up my driveway and slipped the letter under the door before jogging off toward Harriet's side of the street. I enhanced the footage, zoomed in on the shoes white with a jagged blue stripe. The same pair Harriet wore every morning to power walk around the block. The next day, I filed a formal police report for harassment and trespassing. The detective on duty, a no-nonsense woman with a clipped tone named Sergeant Delaney, took it seriously. "You're saying the HOA president is impersonating city officials, forging documents, and now sending threats in the middle of the night?" she asked as I showed her the footage. "Yes, I have the original emails, altered forms, and now this." Sergeant Delaney nodded slowly. "If this pans out, that's not just harassment. That's multiple counts of fraud and potential misuse of authority. Give me a couple days." I didn't have to wait that long. On Monday morning, 2 unmarked cruisers pulled into the neighborhood. Harriet was mid-lecture with a new resident, pointing at a porch light fixture when the officers approached her. She stiffened. Then they pulled out the warrant, not for her arrest yet, but for a search of her home and HOA office records. Apparently, the forged document had been traced to her home printer. The city had also confirmed she'd impersonated a code enforcement officer in an email chain requesting the inspection. It took less than an hour before news spread like wildfire. By that afternoon, someone had started a group chat for residents titled "Free Our Streets." I didn't join, no need to. The real work had already started. The county issued an emergency injunction freezing the HOA's enforcement powers pending the investigation. The treasurer resigned the following morning, citing a hostile internal environment. Colin tried to distance himself, claiming ignorance, but the judge's letter I had delivered earlier had already put his name on the radar. He went quiet. 2 days later, a special county hearing was held to review the HOA's charter. I was invited to speak. The hearing room was packed rows of folding chairs, a panel of county officials, and a small podium with a microphone that squeaked every time someone tapped it. I wore a collared shirt and brought a thick folder with every document I'd gathered since the beginning. When I spoke, I stuck to facts. No dramatic speeches. I laid out the pattern: harassment disguised as enforcement, fraudulent amendments, impersonation of government officials, and targeted retaliation against homeowners who pushed back. The panel listened. They asked questions, and for once, Harriet wasn't there to interrupt. By the end of the hearing, the county had decided to place the HOA under temporary receivership, meaning an independent third party would manage it until a new board could be elected. The best part: the receiver was Judge Baines. He called me that evening. "You know," he said, "this isn't the first community to let power go to someone's head, but it's the first time I've seen someone fight back with a binder and a security system." "I just wanted to build a shed," I said. He laughed. "Well, you built something better. You built accountability." The following week, Harriet was officially charged with forging a government document and impersonating a city official. Her mugshot made the local news. For the first time in years, people in the neighborhood smiled at each other without tension. At the next community event, a summer potluck held in the park near the entrance, I brought my famous smoked wings and found a line already forming. Mr. Thompson brought his homemade lemonade. The Nguyens brought spring rolls. Even the quiet couple from the corner lot brought chairs and stayed the whole time. Nobody mentioned the shed. But when one neighbor asked if I'd consider running for the new board when elections opened in the fall, I just said, "We'll see." Because for now, the shed stood exactly where it belonged, solid, approved, and unbothered, just like the neighborhood. The first board election under receivership was held at the end of September. The weather had just started to cool, and the leaves were beginning to dry and curl along the sidewalks. People were showing up early to the community center in button-downs and polo shirts, filling out ballots at folding tables with fresh pens. Judge Baines stood near the back, clipboard in hand, making sure everything ran by the book. He didn't say much. He didn't have to. I didn't put my name in for the board. I'd already done what I came to do. But I did nominate someone: Teresa Langley, the same neighbor who dropped off the cobbler weeks ago. She was a retired public school principal, sharp as a tack, and had just enough patience to keep a room full of homeowners from turning into a shouting match. When they announced the results, Teresa won by a landslide. So did Mr. Nguyen. Mr. Thompson accepted a seat only after 3 people begged him to. The new board was set. That was the last time Harriet Anderson was mentioned in public until the trial. The charges brought against her were more serious than anyone expected. Initially, it was just the forged inspection request and the impersonation. But Sergeant Delaney's investigation had uncovered far more. When the county searched the HOA office's storage unit, they found a hidden file cabinet containing years of unreported fines and fee collections, some totaling in the thousands, none of which were ever deposited into the HOA's official account. Instead, the money had been funneled into a private bank account registered under the name Anderson Preservation Fund, which Harriet had disguised as a landscaping services vendor. The treasurer, who stepped down early on, had signed off on the paperwork without looking too closely. Colin had approved the checks. A forensic accountant followed the trail. The fund had paid for 2 vacations, home renovations, and a leased luxury SUV. It was fraud, plain and simple. But the most damning evidence came from a set of deleted emails recovered from an old laptop messages between Harriet and a man named Eric Langford, a real estate agent who'd been quietly buying up foreclosed homes in the area. Harriet had been leveraging her position to issue unjustified fines, push homeowners into delinquency, and then fast-track foreclosure proceedings. Langford would swoop in and scoop up the properties for cheap, and Harriet would collect a kickback disguised as a referral bonus. It wasn't just unethical, it was criminal. The trial didn't drag on. Harriet's attorney tried to negotiate a plea, but the prosecutors had her dead to rights. She was charged with wire fraud, conspiracy to commit real estate fraud, impersonation of a public official, and unlawful misappropriation of HOA funds. She pleaded guilty on most counts in exchange for a reduced sentence. Still, the judge handed her 2 years in state prison, plus restitution to every homeowner she targeted. The restitution fund was set up through the court. Homeowners who could show proof of wrongful fines or foreclosures were eligible for reimbursement. Teresa and the new board worked with a pro bono legal team to help people file their claims. It wasn't just about the money, it was about setting things right. Colin was disbarred from practicing in any legal adjacent field. He vanished from the neighborhood within a week of the ruling. Nobody missed him. Langford's real estate license was revoked, and he was fined heavily by the state licensing board. He avoided jail time by cooperating fully and surrendering all properties he'd acquired through the scheme. The houses were sold at fair market value to families on the county's affordable housing waitlist. With the legal mess behind us, the neighborhood finally had room to breathe. And for the first time since I'd moved in, people started showing pride in where they lived, not because they were afraid of a fine, but because they actually respected the community they were part of. I decided to tear out the old patch of dead grass in my front yard and replace it with a native plant garden. Teresa came by one morning while I was planting a low-growing manzanita bush along the edge. "You know," she said, leaning on her cane, "I think that shed of yours might be the most useful thing ever built in this neighborhood." "I just needed a place to store my tools," I said. She laughed. Well, it ended up being the tool that fixed a lot more. The new HOA board made transparency their priority. Every meeting was open, recorded, and posted online. They revised the handbook with actual homeowner input. And they did something I never thought I'd see. They eliminated the automatic fine system entirely. Instead, they created a mediation committee made up of volunteers who'd meet with homeowners to resolve issues face to face. It worked better than anyone expected. The best part: they installed a public notice board near the mailboxes. On it, they posted upcoming meetings, birthdays, lost pet alerts, and a rotating Neighbor of the Month spot with a photo and short write-up. One morning, I found my face up there. The caption read, "Michael Johnson for reminding us that standing up isn't the same as standing alone." I didn't take it down. I let it stay up until the next month's name replaced mine. A few weeks later, I noticed something small but symbolic. The old HOA mailbox, once padlocked and guarded like Fort Knox, had been replaced with a simple open slot. No cameras, no clipboard-wielding sentry, just a box and a sign above it that said, "Suggestions welcome." That was the last thing I needed to see to know it was over. The shed still stands in the backyard. I added a weatherproof sign to the side just above the door. It reads, "Pre-approved, permanently."